Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you today our guest speaker, and she is one of the best minds, honestly, in the employer branding business. Jennifer Newbill is currently the senior manager, and she's within the Center of Excellence, which basically means the brain trust over at Dell. And she leads all of their candidate attraction, engagement, and experience kind of across the board. Between her and her team, they oversee all of the employer brand strategy, manage all of the campaigns, social media, content, and all those things like visual graphics and social assets that every organization is talking about today. She also helps oversee candidate experience, recruiting tools and process, go-to-marketing strategies, et cetera, et cetera. Prior to Dell, she's worked for a lot of different online companies as well, has a great background in recruiting and candidate development, and she is currently a resident of Austin, Texas. So you can follow her on Twitter at Jennifer N.A. at T. Dell. I don't actually know what that means, but I actually follow her on Twitter, and she's pretty good to follow. So I definitely make sure to shout her out and welcome Jennifer.
Thank you. That would be Jennifer N at Dell. So one of the things that we do at Dell is we help our team members that get their social media certification brand themselves using Dell as their Twitter handle. But it was still a great introduction. Thank you so much. So I wanted to start off today's discussion, and as Matt had mentioned, use the chat window to ask any questions. I've told him he's more than welcome to interrupt me at any time. But I wanted to start off and just provide a little context around my experience at the Glassdoor Summit. So I was very fortunate to attend the first summit last year. And I was attending as an audience member. So I had that perspective and that lens from last year, and I thought, this is a great event. And I was really excited to hear that they were going to be repeating the event in the future. I'm already excited about 2016. And then this year I was able to participate in the audience, but also as a presenter. So I hope that some of my takeaways as both a panelist and a presenter, and also someone that was participating in the audience, will be meaningful and a valuable conversation for all of you. So just a couple of data points. I don't know about you guys, but I love infographics, data points. These takeaways are absolutely amazing from this year's Glassdoor Summit. We had over 6,600 tweets using the Glassdoor Summit GD Summit hashtag, which is pretty amazing because that reached almost 2.5 million people. And what was really cool, and I remember at one point about halfway through the day, Allison Hayden, who's one of the leaders over there at Glassdoor, she was like, we're trending in the United States on Twitter. And I remember there were some other really big news things going on that day. So really just in 1 year, from 2014 to 2015, this summit has really grown. And clearly there's big influence happening within the United States on this. But we also had people from outside the U.S. And correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think I heard people from over 30 different countries were part of the live stream. And you can see here in the upper left of the page, almost 8,000 people joined through the live stream, which is super impressive, and of course it was a little scary for those of us on stage. But what's really cool about the summit is you have 200 people in person. I wouldn't really call it cozy, but it's kind of wedding size, right? You get a chance to kind of shake the hands and talk to almost everybody in the room. You get to interact with all the other panelists and speakers, but then you're also getting in front of nearly 8,000 people. So it's just really cool the way that Glassdoor set that up.
And what I always thought, and actually what I thought was really cool, was that it was a user conference, more or less, right? Glassdoor threw it. My feedback at the end of the day was they didn't talk about product enough. I mean, it was definitely very, very focused on employer branding best practices, and I thought, content-wise, really hit on all the hot topics.
Yeah, that's a really good takeaway. There wasn't a lot of, this is what Glassdoor does. There were a few pieces of that, but it was really talking about what's happening in the industry and trying to provide a lot of value for the participants. You can see some of the key takeaways over on the right side of the page. I mean, I'd have to agree wholeheartedly with Lars Schmidt. I mean, the caliber of people and the quality of the content throughout the day was just second to none. And I would say for someone in my role, and as Matt introduced me, hopefully you have a little better idea of what my team and I do, it's probably my favorite event now. So if you haven't had a chance to attend, and I wasn't asked to sell the event in 2016, I'm just doing this out of, the goodness of my own heart, try to attend because it's really a fabulous group of people. You can also see on the bottom left of the page the hot topics. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, right? What were the hot topics? What were the key takeaways? And it's really funny because our first key takeaway is one of the biggest words here in the bottom left, and it's transparency. So what happened was at the beginning of the day, Glassdoor's CEO, Robert Homan, kicked off the day, the morning, and he really set the tone. And he talked about transparency. And what was really interesting about transparency is he said, well, transparency is the new normal. You're kind of thinking, what does he mean by the new normal? And what he means is that customers today really expect transparency, right? Let's be honest. Amazon and Zappos and all these great companies that figured it out along the way. But really, your employees and your candidates now expect it because ultimately, they're consumers too, right? Consumers and employees are the same people. So we also talked about that a lot as well. And throughout most of the day, most of the speakers and the panelists talk about the importance of embracing technology and how, or transparency, excuse me, and how transparency actually builds trust. So trust was another key takeaway as well. So if you look at this next slide, obviously this number is pretty compelling, 96%. I mean, that's almost 100% of all people. But individuals that are job seekers say that it's important to work for a company that embraces technology. So that can't be ignored. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and what I think is fascinating is that 4% of people actually answered that they wanted to work for an opaque company.
I don't want to work for a company that's open and honest and builds trust. Please just go behind your closed doors and don't tell me what's going on. Yeah, I'd have to agree. I would like to think that 99 to 100% of people want to work for a company that embraces transparency. But really, what's interesting to me is this is something that your employees and your candidates want. And I can't help but think it's sort of this psychology or this human behavior that people feel like not only do they want to share their experience, not only do they want to read about other people's experiences, right? Have you had a friend post on Facebook, tell me about your cell phone, what do you like about it? I'm thinking about getting one. I see one of these every week. But people feel like they deserve the information. It's not that, oh, I'm getting this lucky access to this review, or I'm finding out about this because I have a friend here. At this point, we're kind of beyond that, right? And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Matt, as well, but the way I look at it is people are like, I deserve to have a peek behind the curtain.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that at this point in time, organizations are building an employer brand whether they like it or not, right? And so I think that it's, people are going to find out the truth. So it's best for companies to present that up front and be able to manage the message rather than have job seekers completely control it by not participating in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. I'd mentioned Allison Hedden earlier, who's the head of brand strategy at Glassdoor. And I don't know if you guys have seen this study, but there was a multi-year study that was conducted. I believe Glassdoor has an economist on staff. How cool is that, right? And one of the things she did talk about is that companies that have higher employee ratings financially outperformed on the S&P 500 by over 100%, 122% actually, to be exact. So if you receive resistance around some of the things that Matt and I are talking about, right, around transparency and being open and direct and honest and building trust, you can at least fall back on, well, you know what, companies that have open and direct dialogue with their candidates, their customers, their employees, they actually perform better and they make more money. That tends to get people's attention.
Yeah, and I think, right now I just saw a report that says companies are spending 3.6% of their overall corporate revenues on employer branding activities, yes. And it's obviously the most easy way to get an ROI on that investment, right? So I think that, breaking it down to dollars and cents is the easiest way to build a business case.
I think that 3.6, though, is not enough. What do you think?
Well, that's the current estimate, but I also think that $90 million may be a bit conservative in terms of overall market size. So, there's money in them dar hills. Yeah,
exactly. So this is a great quote. Really ultimately what it does is it sums up what Matt and I are talking about. What Brian's saying is that transparency is a must, especially in this day and age, if you want to build a truly strong relationship with your employees and your candidates. And again, I throw out customers there, but a lot of us get the customer concept. We're not really getting the candidate and the employee standpoint. At the summit, Robert Holman, who I talked a little bit about earlier, the CEO of Glassdoor, he also talked about Edelman's Trust Barometer. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, and I'm going to just mention a little bit more about that in a moment. But he talked about, what the Trust Barometer does is it scans the marketplace for trusted sources of information. So who do you as an individual trust the most? And what's interesting is that nearly 30% of those individuals said they trust the employees. They either said a regular employee or a subject matter expert, and I'll show you a little bit more about that later, but they actually tend not to trust the HR team or the CEO quite as much, which is pretty interesting. So we'll talk a little bit about engaging your employees and helping to train or certify them or whatever it is that you want to do to be employee advocates, because that also builds transparency and trust in the marketplace as well. So here's just a few tips and a few things to keep in mind when you think about transparency in a practical and actionable way. So first, getting your leaders involved. And I know that's easier said than done, right? There's some people that might say, well, hey, my leadership team's not really into it. Help drive open dialogue with your leaders and, maybe find somebody on your leadership team that sort of gets the concept and have them model that behavior to really kind of get the ball rolling. But definitely get your leaders involved and start having this discussion if you're not doing that yet. And then solicit feedback. Solicit them from your employees, solicit them from your candidates. Glassdoor, right? They're leaving feedback for you right now, to Matt's point, whether you are bothering to look at it or not. And what's amazing is you have a free profile and you can get this feedback. You could go in and get really important actionable things that you can take away and share with your leadership team and say, hey, here's a theme that we're hearing. Maybe we should go do something about this. People are unhappy about this. Or maybe this is something people are really happy with. Let's not cut that benefit, right? So you can really drive a lot of good conversation with your leadership team. And then, of course, acknowledge wins and areas for improvement. And one of the things that we're talking about at Dell is creating a feedback loop with a clear cadence. So, for example, Glassdoor's made some great updates to their platform where you can filter out feedback by either function or by location. I really like the location. And you can see how does the feedback for your company in Brazil differ for the rest of your company on average. And you could start to have dialogue with the leadership team and the HR team in Brazil specifically to say, this is why this is meaningful to you. Here's your ratings and your reviews for your particular location. And so that's something that we're looking to do to, again, make it meaningful for people and show them the importance of the transparency. So let's talk about being human. Really at the end of the day, we're all human beings interacting with each other. I don't know about you, but when I call my credit card company, I do not want to get the robot. I'm like pressing 0 repeatedly. I could see you doing this, Matt. Give me a human representative, right? We don't want to talk to a company. We don't want corporate speak. We don't want a robot. We just want to engage with other people. And so that was a really big takeaway from the session as well. So Matt, do you do that when you call your American Express?
Yeah, no, I do everything I can online actually, because it turns out even dealing with credit cards is easier than filling out an application on an ATS. So
it is. Good point. I like that. So here's just a couple of examples. I love this. Spencer Raskoff was one of the key speakers at the event. So after Robert Holman kicked everything off, got the tone set, talked about transparency, dropped a few, amazing employment branding bombs, everybody was just really intrigued and ready to go. And Spencer walks on stage. And what's interesting about him is he spent actually quite a bit of time talking about the role of the CEO. And he's a CEO, right? He's a CEO of Zillow. And he said, my role isn't to run the day-to-day operations or finance or marketing. He's like, I have an interest in it. I want to influence it. I'm a stakeholder. I'm the CEO. But he said, here's my role as a CEO. And one of the things he pointed out is what you see on the screen right there. He's like, my role isn't to engage with our vendors, our partners, our investors, our customers, and our employees. And he takes this very seriously. It's not corporate speak, shrouded in kind of a lot of double talk. It's just him being human and being real. And it's really cool that you can see here, someone on his team had a baby and he responds right away. And what's amazing is these are two different responses from Spencer just 2 days in a row. It's not like he's going on to Twitter once a month and, oh God, I've got to be active on social. He is a true social CEO. And we hope we can clone and replicate him at more companies. It's pretty amazing to see in action. What's interesting is I was talking to somebody who will remain nameless at an event a couple weeks ago, and he told me, oh, I have people on my team tweet for me. And Matt, I'm curious to hear what you think about it, but I was just like, don't go around bragging about that, man. That's not authentic. That's not human. That's not genuine.
I mean, so that happens a lot. Lord knows that I have ghost tweeted and ghost written, related content. I think the thing is, though, if you are relying on somebody else to put your voice out there to the public, ultimately you're not doing justice to the entire point of the exercise, right?
Yeah. You're not doing justice to yourself or to your followers. They're not really hearing from you. So that's just something really cool that that Spencer talked about and clearly demonstrates every day, not just at the Glassdoor Summit, but he's a big believer. Just some, additional actionable tips, some things for humanizing your brand. Here's just some ideas, and some of these ideas came from a number of the different presenters over the course of the day. Of course, we talked about getting your leaders involved on social. Get your entire employee workforce. Pilot a social tool, whatever it takes just to kind of see what happens with a group of people when they get social and start humanizing your brand. It's pretty amazing because you can actually see a difference. Definitely shine a spotlight on your people. That's where I think that we've really become really excited on the Dell team is we're showcasing more of our individual people, their stories. We're getting them to write blogs. We do have an individual, a couple of people on the team who are there to help because not everybody feels comfortable with writing. So we're like, hey, tell your story, write it down. We'll help copy edit it. We'll help get it out to the world because what you have is something really cool to share. It's going to be more meaningful coming from you than it is from somebody in HR or in PR, probably even worse. We have an employee, for example, at our company who swam the English Channel. I was like, that is so cool. And he actually has a picture of him in the ocean, with his cap, like swimming. And the things that your employees do, not just at work, which the things they do at work are amazing too, but the things they do outside of work, showcase that, spotlight that. Again, make your company human and show off your people because your people are your greatest asset, really.
And by focusing, I would say as well, on what employees are doing out of the office, even if it's not as awesome as swimming the English Channel, it's also a subtle signal out there that you actually can have a life and there is work-life balance. So, it's definitely a good thing to represent.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we talked about, the hashtag for today's event. Quick reminder, GD chat. Please start tweeting. Create a hashtag because a hashtag that works and that's simple and that's actionable for your team members, they'll start to use it. And then you can actually monitor what's going on. And so that's just these are some really quick, simple tips around, humanizing your brand. So evolution, what do we mean by evolution? Salesforce, Jennifer Johnson presented after Spencer did a fabulous job. She goes by JJ. So JJ talked about evolving the talent ecosystem at Salesforce. And really she talked about sometimes it's a matter of just measuring what's going on in the marketplace and with your organization and changing processes to work for your candidates and your employees and to improve your candidate experience. So she talked about that Salesforce had a really demanding amount of hires they need to make. For the size of their organization, they had to hire 5,000 people, which is quite a few, actually. So they took a couple of different steps to try to manage this, huge hiring load. First, they used data to understand the current labor market, and they really did their research so that they could put together a really clear and compelling plan. One of the things that they did that was really interesting is they analyzed their referrals. And what they found out, and I bet this is the same for a lot of our organizations, that it took only 8 referral leads to get a hire as compared to over 150 outside leads to get a hire. I mean, the math right there is just, it's clear, right? So they said our employees are bringing us the best, most qualified people. We need to focus on our employee referral program. And I know a lot of us have employee referral programs, but they did some really slick stuff at Salesforce. They even created an app for their employees in order to share their contacts and get them submitted into their referral program. So just, thinking about the process is not always a bad thing when it comes to improving your brand and your candidate experience.
Yeah, and I would add, and if you're not already convinced on the power of employee referrals, this data is from Career Crossroads, but candidates who come in as employee referrals actually convert into new hires 400 times more than candidates who apply blind. So, I mean,
wow.
That right there's a pretty powerful stat, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. I joined that their webinar that they had on Friday, and it was amazing.
Yeah,
so a little bit more about evolution and what JJ talked about. So one of the things she said is, at Salesforce, they train their recruiters and their hiring managers in competency-based interviewing. Now, a lot of us are doing that, right? But they really put all of their energy into this training. And what they also provided was a certification for their EVP. I thought that was kind of cool, so that they walk away with something, I spent 2 or 3 hours in this training, but I'm certified in our EVP, and I know what EVP stands for, Employment Value Proposition, and, I can help create a consistent message in the marketplace. So that really helped to drive some really positive behaviors among the leadership team. And next, what they did is they customized what they called an email journey. And you think, well, emails, big deal. But have you ever been in a situation, and let's say maybe you onboarded a company and you're getting these automated emails, and maybe it's after you apply to a company, you're getting these automated emails. They don't seem to make sense, right? So they really put a lot of time and effort and thought into these communications, and they wanted it to feel like a journey that made sense and that people would actually want to click and open up these emails. And they had a click and open rate of over 90% once they actually went through this process. So some really amazing things around just evolution and thinking about your organization, what you're doing, and how you can improve it. And again, it could just be in changing a process or looking at, well, what's working and how can we make it work even better.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest changes organizations can make to really make a difference here is to start framing this material not into this is what we need, this is what we're looking for, but rather presenting what's actually in it for the candidate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. So let's move on. Powerful. You might be thinking, like, what do we mean by powerful? That's so weird. The way I look at it, and we talked quite a bit about this at the summit, is that, the power is no longer really with the companies, and I'm sure a lot of you can feel it. I know I can. It's really with your, not just your candidates, but your employees. The ability for your employees to influence the marketplace is just absolutely incredible. And I had the pleasure of co-presenting with Christopher Hannigan from Edelman, and I talked about Edelman a little bit more because Robert Homan started the day kind of talking about that trust barometer, and that really captured people's attention. And he talked about how your employees can be your best advocates, and he provided some really interesting data points around this. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So, in the 2015 Edelman Trust Barometer, it's this annual global survey that they run. It tracks trust and sources of information about companies. And what's really interesting here is you can see individuals trust a technical expert more than an employee and more than a CEO. And actually, and I believe, Matt, you had pointed this out to us last week, HR is kind of at the bottom of the list. HR is even lower than a CEO.
And HR is actually even lower than PR, which means the candidates trust a function whose entire purpose is to spin the truth and publicly just. So I think that's an interesting outcome there.
It's very interesting, and you bring up a good point too. Is I couldn't help but think HR is who has had the entire responsibility. Let's be honest. Sometimes recruiters feel like they got the weight of the world on their shoulders. I come from a recruiting background, so maybe that's just my sentiment. But it's like, God, I'm supposed to sell this company, and it's really difficult. And the hiring managers, they don't give me feedback, and they're not helping me. It really the problem is that we're thinking about it the wrong way, right? It's not that recruiters can't sell the company; they can. some of them are awesome at it, right? We want them on Twitter, we want them on LinkedIn, but they really need our help. They need the entire organization's help, and really, ultimately, they're relying on that most trusted source, which are the hiring leaders, the employees, the individuals that are doing the day-to-day work. So it's just kind of interesting that we've been relying on HR and recruiting, and that's probably not the best way to look at it. The best way to look at it is empowering your employees, because they've got that power and that influence in the marketplace.
Right.
So we'll move on to measurements. As I mentioned, I got to co-present with Christopher, which was really cool. So he talked about trust, and then what I did is I presented a case study where I talked about Dell, and I talked about our candidate experience journey, and I talked a little bit about kind of some of the things that we did to embrace Glassdoor. And one of the things that I discussed, and really other presenters also brought up, was the concept of measuring what matters to your organization and your company culture. So, for example, I shared in the presentation, I had a couple people in the audience raise their hand. I was like, "Who here loves advice to senior management on Glassdoor?" Right? And where that comes from is if you've spent some time on your company reviews in Glassdoor, you'll note that one of the fields is an optional field, and it's advice to senior management. And I started reading some of those fields a lot more in those comments, and I was like, wow, there's some gems in here, right? Some of them are funny, some of them are interesting, but there's themes. There's definitely themes. And what I've noticed is about 60%, even though it's an optional field, about 60% of our reviewers choose to provide advice, right? And typically when they spend that extra time, they're really passionate about this advice that they're giving, and they lend a little bit more color and commentary to their feedback beyond the standard Glassdoor review, which of course is great because you've got the pros, you've got the cons, and all this great stuff. But that's a measurement piece that in particular for our company, right, so measure what matters to your organization, that we really found very helpful. So that's just an example. So find something that your organization cares about. Maybe you're making a change to your comp and ben plan. Start monitoring your comp and ben, right, and see what happens to that rating. And also, now that individuals can actually write reviews about benefits, go in there and start reading those if that's something that's important to your company. Other things that have worked for us at Dell is understanding that our candidates are really potential future customers. So I spent some time talking about that at the event, and we've talked about that a little bit today as well. This relationship could potentially last for a long, long time. So just because you don't hire somebody doesn't mean you're not going to have a multi-year relationship with them. So that was a really important key takeaway, at least from my perspective. It's been a key learning for us, definitely at Dell. We monitor on a routine basis our employee and candidate sentiment. We watch for trends. So we talked a little bit about that. Openly engage with those that are posting on your site. One of the great things about the way the Glassdoor site is set up is individuals can post, your organization can then respond. But what I found is there's a little bit of a myth there. People say, oh, well, that's like social media. You start responding and then people start responding back, and it creates a social war. No, it's perfect the way it's designed. Individuals want to be heard. They want to share their feelings. They post it on Glassdoor. You respond, and then the conversation ends. So everybody gets a chance to communicate and to voice their opinion and be heard, but then people can kind of move on at that point, right? So those are just some takeaways from the presentation that I gave about Dell. So I want to talk about candidate experience. Of course, candidate experience came up repeatedly. And one of the things about candidate experience is we talked about asking yourself, what is your candidate experience at your company? Have you walked in the shoes of your candidates? Have you filled out an application? Have you tried to do that on your mobile phone? That's pretty eye-opening. We went through that exercise last year at Dell, and we were like, wow, this is bad. No wonder our candidates aren't completing a lot of mobile applications. And then, of course, you have actionable takeaways that you can go and do something about. But unless you go and you act like you're a candidate and you go through that journey yourself, you're not really going to have anything to improve because you're kind of sticking your head in the sand and you're really ignoring what the candidate experience is. Go and Google your company. Go to your career site. Just because you don't manage or own the career site doesn't mean you can't go and spend time on the site and see what type of content is there. Is it compelling? Go to your Glassdoor profile, right? We've talked about this. Read your reviews. Respond to your reviews. Go to your social profiles. What are people posting? what kind of questions are people asking? A pretty common one for us, quite frankly, is where I applied to rec number 1111. Where am I in the process, right? So one of the things we did is we created a infographic, a visual graphic, just to help our candidates with commonly asked questions, and tried to really push it out there for people to say, if you want to know where you are in the process, this is how you can log in and you can see what step and status you're in. So we look, monitor those types of themes, of questions, and really try to create things that help your candidates.
And I know we talked a little bit about hashtags earlier. One of the things that I've in the past found to be successful is using those requisition numbers and actually putting a hashtag on there and tweeting updates every time you move through the search. So that really puts the onus on candidates to go there and check their status, but always gives you the opportunity to provide it quite easily.
That is a great idea. I've actually never heard that before, so I've got a takeaway myself.
There you go.
Matt.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep you on the line here because you're being called out for one of your tweets from the summit here. Tell just a little bit more about what you were thinking when you posted this.
I mean, it's pretty simple, right? Like, looking for a job sucks, and you most of the time, even if you get referred, don't really know anyone who's going to touch the hiring process, right? So what you're really looking for, as much as is an awesome opportunity, is the type of person who you want to work with. And I think as the first point of contact for most candidates, recruiters are really the brand ambassadors of an organization. And I think ultimately candidate experience succeeds when a candidate walks away thinking that no matter what the outcome, that you actually care about them and you did everything you could to help facilitate their success.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, just like Matt said, paint a picture, paint a realistic picture, because ultimately that's what candidates want. When you go back to candidate experience, transparency, some of the things we've talked about, they're just like, listen, I just want to peek behind the curtain. I just want to know what it's really like to work there. And I also want to be able to ask myself, can I picture myself at this company? And if they can, super. If they can't, that's okay. There's other places where maybe they should be looking if it's not a fit for them. And then also, adopt a customer service attitude, right? As I mentioned earlier, this was a big learning point for us at Dell, and we created our commitment to candidates. Really what we wanted to do was say, what are the things that we want to commit to giving people a good experience and creating a good journey for them. And so there's a lot of different examples out there beyond the application. One of them, for example, would be marketable job descriptions. That seems to be a really popular discussion point at this time. If people look at your job description and they're still like scratching their head, like, what the heck is this job? You got a problem, right? People are just going to click on and move away. And your job descriptions are probably your most viewed piece of content if you think about it. And so just things like that, Stacy Zappar with Tenfold did a great job. She was probably one of the more passionate people that presented talking about candidate experience at the event. So I really got a lot out of her presentation. So let's talk about differentiation. Another really good presentation was Richard Mosley, who is with Universum. And what's really cool about Richard's background, and I think it's actually the coolest background for somebody that's in talent and branding, is he's a former anthropologist. He actually used to visit a particular tribe in Africa. He tells kind of his whole story, and it's really interesting, and how he explained to his kids like what he did for a living. But really at the end of the day, he talked about how this tribe had these very unique traits. And this was what made this tribe in this single part of this country in this part of Africa. And he was like, I started thinking about that when it comes to brands. And so he's like, I started doing a little digging, and I started kind of looking, after he joined Universum. He's like, I noticed a few things, and he got a lot of laughs out of the audience. Because he showed a headline, and one of them was, I think it's A World of Opportunity. And he started clicking through, and multiple companies all had that on their career splash page. Not just one, not just three, like 5, right? And so people are kind of groaning in the audience like, yeah, we're kind of saying the same thing. We're not differentiating ourselves. So not only is that confusing for the people at the company and for the employees, it's confusing for your candidates. Another example he used, and I thought this was really funny, and thankfully Dell wasn't on there because I was like, I think we have this on our career site. Innovation is in our DNA.
Okay.
multiple companies. Remember that? He just clicked through and everybody was just laughing. Like, I think there were a couple people in the audience that pointed at the screen and said, that's my company that I work for. We're guilty of that.
Absolutely.
So we just talked about, this concept. It's really simple: look different, talk different, be different. What does that ultimately mean? There's a lot of different ways that he talked about being different. One is creating a signature experience. JJ talked about that at Salesforce. What can we do to really capitalize on our organization at Salesforce? We've got a great referral program. Okay, let's create an app for our employees. That is an effort that is well worth the time and whatever money they spent. I'm not under the impression it was a lot, but it was really worth it for them. They wanted to create that signature experience for their employees, for their employee referral program, because that makes sense for their organization. He also talked about unique brand positioning, distinctive visual identity. One of the other things, and I don't know if you remember this too, Matt, but it was pretty funny. He was really poking fun at people. It was all in good fun. But he showed some pictures, the stock images, right? We're all guilty of a little stock imagery here and there. But he was like, man, is there some kind of rule that exists that you have to have 2 females and 2 males with, 2 different ethnicities, right? And we're all doing the same thing, or some form of the same thing, right? So he's like, you don't have to be Apple. You don't necessarily have to be this, trendsetter for being different and being a unique company, right? Apple really has done a fabulous job of that. But he's like, be you. Just simply be you and do the best you can to be you.
And one of the things I like to talk about with this is the trade show example, right? Don't be a table with a skirt. You walk in and everyone more or less is the same display and is selling the same jobs. But when you have all these people walking around, how do you stand out and actually engage those candidates in a conversation? And the only way to do that is by getting away from the table and really presenting yourself.
Yes, that's a great example. We are all guilty of the table with the skirt and the tchotchkes, and we all have the same handouts, the light up pens, and the stress balls. It's like, I don't know if a stress ball is a great idea, right? Like, hey, come work for us. You need the stress ball.
Yeah, there's something for you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a really good session. So if you didn't get to listen to it, very funny. A lot of kind of reflection in the audience around, yeah, we're a little guilty of that. But again, he was poking fun at some of the things that we're all guilty of, and we had a little bit of a laugh about it. So let's talk about authenticity. This is another kind of buzzword, right? We're hearing authenticity a lot, and we're like, really at the end of the day in our space, what do we mean when we talk about authenticity? And Celinda Appleby, who's the head of employment branding over at Oracle, I really like her style because she kind of cuts to the chase, right? And she's like, authenticity is just getting over yourself. And she also said, don't be a brand narcissist. And you're like, well, what does that mean? And really at the end of the day, I think of it this way. Have you ever dated somebody, I'm sure we're all guilty of this, that all they did was talk about themselves? You remember that ex-boyfriend or that ex-girlfriend, and all they do is like, I did this, and then I did this, I'm so great. You get bored really quick, and you disengage. You don't want to say yes to the dinner date. You don't want to say yes to the coffee date, and you kind of drop them like a hot potato, right? You're at risk of that to some degree with your employment brand. If all you do is talk about yourselves and we're so great, you want to do a little bit of that, right? You want people to like you. But there's something to be said for the narcissist who's like me, you really need to like me. Don't be so desperate. And also, this is a two-way relationship, right? You want to talk about each other. I think one of the things that companies do really well is when they engage with individuals on social media, maybe they post a motivational Monday, which is a really common post. They might say, what do you always make sure you do on Monday? And you just see what people say, right? People like to be asked a question that they can answer in 140 characters or less. It's just a kind of a cool way to start the week. So ask questions, curate and share content that's not just about company ABC, right? Maybe talk about industry news, maybe share some interviewing or resume tips, maybe share some tips on how to, improve and punch up your LinkedIn profile. Your followers are looking for not only engagement, but maybe they're looking for help or some tips and some things. So don't make it just about you. And that's really ultimately what we mean about authenticity. And marketer. So I think one of the takeaways for me is, I've been in recruiting or in the recruiting space for quite some time. I think we all feel pretty comfortable about the idea of recruiters being salespeople, right? We can all kind of agree, like, yeah, okay, recruiters are salespeople, I get that. But what about your recruiting organization acting or behaving like a marketing organization? And so there was a lot of discussion around think like a marketer and really create a marketing type strategy at the event that was really interesting. And there's just some things to consider, right, as takeaways for you. Applying marketing tactics and thought leadership to your recruiting strategy. For example, work with your marketing team. One example at Dell is we have the LinkedIn account team that works with our marketing organization, and we have our LinkedIn account team that works with our HR team, right, our recruiting team, and we're very siloed. We have separate QBRs and we have separate meetings, and marketing doesn't know what recruiting's doing on LinkedIn, and vice versa. What we've started doing at our organization is actually we have a LinkedIn council, and it's comprised of people from social media team, marketing, brand, and HR. And then we also invite each other to our quarterly business reviews. We actually had our business review with LinkedIn last week, and I invited the marketing director and our social media team and said, hey, do you want to listen in? And just, she engaged with the conversation. It helped build rapport between myself and her as well, because let's admit, we all need to work together to get great results, right? So just try to kind of think about things that you can do to really put some marketing strategy and tactics around your recruiting campaigns and your recruiting strategy. Leveraging social media, of course, leveraging your employees to be your advocates. We've talked about that. We talked about job descriptions very briefly. Job descriptions that aren't written, that are lacking marketability, that aren't written in an SEO-friendly way, that are full of acronyms, we're all doing ourselves a disservice if you think about it. So just really kind of thinking about, how can I be a little bit more of a marketer and maybe a little less of a recruiter and a salesperson. So that was a big takeaway as well. And Matt, you gave a great presentation at the Candidate Experience Awards about marketing. Did you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I would just say at the end of the day, obviously candidates are consumers of work, and ultimately what recruiting really comes down to is using the same exact tactics and strategies that consumer marketers do to drive conversion, because candidates are also making a purchasing decision. It's just instead of a product, they're buying a career opportunity. So I definitely think that the process, the outcomes, and the best practices are definitely in alignment. And the good news is that marketing is really easy to understand. If you can recruit, for executive search, this should be pretty easy.
Awesome. I love it. That was a great presentation, by the way. Okay, we're at our final and 10th takeaway, and you're probably wondering, what the heck does mirror mean? I was actually having a conversation with one of my colleagues just recently, and I was trying to kind of explain to them this concept, right, of if your employees are happy and they like their job and they're telling their friends about it, and they're talking about it at happy hour. People are saying, hey, how do you like it at ABC Company? And they're like, oh my God, it rocks, and my leader is so cool, and my team is awesome. That's going to start reflecting in the marketplace, right? Because those people are going to hear about that, and that's going to be a takeaway for them. If on the flip side, your employees are unhappy, they're like, our leadership doesn't know what they're doing, everybody's running around in circles, chicken with their head cut off, whatever it is that's plaguing your organization, they're going to talk about it, they're going to share it, and it's going to be almost a reflection in the marketplace of what's happening. Word of mouth is more powerful than ever. All of our employees and our candidates now, right, which is pretty crazy, pretty cool if you want my opinion, they can share their experiences, they can read other people's experiences, to Matt's point that he just made, just like a consumer. And they want that, and they also feel like they deserve it. So that's just a really big, powerful takeaway for us. So in summation, I love this visual image. At the end of the day, don't be horrible, right? Treat your employees with respect, and you'll get respect and loyalty in return. Be transparent, open, be honest. Don't use corporate speak, right? Be social, engage with your team. Look at your candidate experience top to tail and go, what are the 3 or 4 things we can go do to fix some of this stuff, right? We may not be perfect, but just sitting back on our laurels is not the right thing to do for our organization. And that doesn't just include your external candidates, it includes your internal candidates as well. So with that, I think we've got a few more minutes for some questions. Do you have any, Matt, or any other comments that you'd like to make?
And I just remind everyone, if you have any questions, that was some great information and an awesome recap there, Jennifer. If you have any questions, please enter them in the chat box or tweet using the hashtag GDChat. We do have a pretty good question from Twitter. Earlier we were talking about employer referrals, and she was wondering, do you have any advice on what tools are out there to start an employee referral program?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of tools, and I've got to be honest with you. One of the things I personally struggle with, this is my humility and my honesty coming through here, is there's so many tools out there, it's almost a little overwhelming. We've been using, which is now owned by Oracle, social sourcing tool. Some of you may know it as Talentvine. What's cool about Talentvine is it's got this social sharing component. And for a company that feels pretty comfortable with social and that's training their employees on social media, we like the idea of having all of our jobs pulled externally onto a site and have our candidates go and visit that site, sign up for the talent community and for job alerts, but also our employees visit the site and be able to share jobs that they want to share through their Facebook connections, post on Twitter, their LinkedIn connections. They can also just grab a unique link and throw it into an email, which actually still seems to be the most popular way to do it. There are other companies out there, I will say, that are starting to do a similar type of functionality and tool. And I know that there are, Talent Brew, for example, are looking to update their tool to have a more robust social sharing employee referral type of functionality as well. I don't work for TMP, but we do use them at Dell, and they have talked to us about it. So there are quite a few out there. Those are just a couple that I can think of off the top of my head. Matt, I know you've got your ear to the ground all the time. What are some that you've heard of?
I mean, I definitely think that the best one out there on the market right now is a tool called RollPoint, and they're integrated at a lot of the big Fortune 500 brands. But what I think is good about them, in addition to being really effective at generating referrals, is the fact that that software also acts as a really effective middleware. So it can pretty much act as a plug-and-play for any point solution into any ATS. So I think its value in kind of integrating those sources extends beyond simply referrals, but you do get a best-in-breed referral product as well.
Very cool. I'm going to have to look into that.
Pretty good.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so we got a question in terms of some of the you talked about the measuring outcomes. What specifically would you recommend as benchmarks people measure employer branding success against?
So, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how at Dell we address measurement. We look at talent drivers on LinkedIn. I talked about LinkedIn before, right? What talent drivers is it kind of shows you how you stack up against some of your key competitors in terms of comp, benefits, a lot of the similar things that are asked on Glassdoor. Of course, Glassdoor, we can look at our competitors on our Employee Center, and we can change and swap out their competitors all the time. I was actually on a call with one of our HR VPs, and she was like, I want to see how we compare to Lenovo, and I was able to edit and switch out the competitor right there, and you can see the ratings, how we compare to them in terms of their interview feedback that they get. So LinkedIn's good, Glassdoor is great, the candidate experience awards. I mean, you don't really get to see how you measure against your competitors, but you get this really robust report that comes out that talks about what candidates expect, where companies are leading, where companies are lagging, so that you can kind of create some focus areas for your organization. What are the top 5 things that we need to go focus on? Yeah. Does that help, or do you have any other comments, Matt?
Yeah, I would just add to that. We talked a little bit about thinking like a marketer and working with your marketing department earlier. I think looking at marketing metrics is really a great way to go to build a baseline, and chances are, they already have some pretty good internal statistics. So looking at things like Net Promoter Score, candidates to start the application versus those who finish it, which would be called, marketing and qualified leads, amount of candidates who you talk to who are selected for an interview, to be sales qualified leads, et cetera. So I think really just kind of aligning those metrics is a good place to start.
Yeah, and we talked earlier, you just reminded me, we were talking about referrals and what JJ and her team did over at Salesforce. Look at what your referral rates are. And have there been any trends, and have your referral rates increased, or have they decreased? Have they decreased maybe in certain markets where maybe your employees aren't feeling as engaged? So I think that's another good thing to monitor, because again, your employees reflect kind of on the marketplace and how they're feeling about the organization. One thing they're not going to do is refer people to your organization if they're not feeling good, right? So if they're feeling really bold and bullish and happy, they're going to start referring their friends to your company.
Great. And, I've got another question in here from the audience. In terms of, you had mentioned, sitting in a Salesforce webinar or presentation earlier, and you've made some allusions to some, other resources you've checked out or events you've attended. What do you do to stay on top of what's new and what's next in the wonderful world of employer branding?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. I'm being completely honest here, right? I don't know if that's just my open personality, but it's difficult. There's a lot of information and knowledge out there. Dell is a Burson partner. We also participate with the Career Crossroads. CEB has great content and white papers. And then to me, I love Twitter. I get my daily fix on Twitter of what's going on. I follow Matt. I follow all the people that I mentioned that were presenters at the Glassdoor Summit, right? Richard from Universum, Stacy, Celinda. I mean, these folks are the experts in the field, and I'm constantly just scanning Twitter and LinkedIn and saying, okay, what is the latest article? What's going on here? Recruiting trends. You guys have a newsletter, don't you, where you share some of the latest that's going on in recruiting?
Yeah, well, we're actually recruiting daily, so I'd have to give a shout out there. We heavily cover employer branding, but unlike recruiting trends, we actually include some trends in there. So
awesome. Yeah. So yeah, the newsletters, but it's hard because there is a lot of information out there. I tend to find some sources just more valuable on a consistent basis, and those are usually the emails or the people that I follow on Twitter and LinkedIn that I pay closest attention to.
Yeah, and I would say also, again, going back to kind of, aligning those, reading things like, HubSpot has a great blog for, inbound marketing best practices. Certainly, publications like Adweek or, Pew's brand reports. Those are, really great ways to stay on top of what's going on in marketing, which is obviously, very much what's next in this industry and a lot easier to find interesting information on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question.
Okay, and I think that we are, coming to an end to our time here. But just in terms of, I guess, advice you can give, what is the single thing that you recommend recruiters can do when they get back to their desk to start actually making a difference when it comes to improving their employer brand?
I would say identify a really meaningful piece of content and share that content. Sometimes it's as simple as, okay, have you tweeted today? Sometimes it's as simple as, do you update your status on LinkedIn? And unfortunately, there are some people that are like, how do I do that again? So sometimes sharing what you're doing. Sometimes it's, something as simple as just write a blog about what it's like to be a recruiter at your company. I've seen some really, really well-written recruiter blogs, and it makes me almost want to work at that company, right? So I think just finding some really good content or creating some really good content, thinking about that story that you want to share and posting that, that certainly makes a difference. And then whoever you have, depending on the structure of your organization, to partner with, whether it's directly with the marketing team, whether it's COE team, kind of like myself and my team. A lot of times we find that we create what we think is good content, and our recruiters sometimes just don't know about it. And so we try to spend a lot of time pointing it out to them. And I love it when a recruiter comes to me and says, hey, I've got this candidate. I'm really trying to convince them, to come to Dell, and we're down to the wire. What are 2 or 3 things that I could share with them? Do you have a really good video that's recently come out? They're interested in X or they're interested in Y, and like, oh, we just released a video about our employee resource groups and, how that's an important part of our organization. So yeah, reach out to those that are really comfortable with the content, or create some of your own and get out there and be social.
Awesome, and I think that's some great advice to close on. So with that, I'd like to make a big thank you to Jennifer from joining us, as well as Glassdoor for helping make this webinar possible.